Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn Dissident Dispatch for Monday, December 11th, 2023. Thank you for joining me. If this is your first time to The Reason We Learn, please consider subscribing to the channel to be notified when I make more content about education in America. If it is not your first time, welcome back and thank you for being here. Please like and share this broadcast so other people can join us live in the chat. And I'm going to be going over a lot of stuff that really everyone needs to know. So there's nobody out there that you know who doesn't need to know this. It's not restricted to parents. If you pay taxes in America, you need to watch this show. You know what? Even if you don't pay taxes, if you live here at all, you need to watch this show. I don't often do this. I always do a little housekeeping to let you know about my other opportunities to engage with my content. This is no exception. I'm going to let you know about my community over at Wokescreen, The Reason We Learn, which is at wokescreen.com/The Reason We Learn. I have different levels of membership that you can join. That is actually not current. The price has been lowered for the annual. But what you get there is you get access to 2 private members only live shows a week. And you also get more information about homeschooling and alternatives to school. You get access to me. You get one-stop shop for all my articles and everything that I produce. So it also helps me. And that's something I don't often do here is specifically reach out and ask for your support. There are ways to support me down below in the description, but I want to let you know that the work that I do to bring you these shows does take time. And so every little bit counts any way that you can support the channel, even if it is just with a like and a share right now to get other people here. It boosts the algorithm. Thank you very much. So please consider doing that. So does subscriptions, meaning just like subscribe to the channel. That helps. So what are we talking about today? Well, we're going to start with what I hope will be a brief rundown of the high cost of hemming and hawing in front of Congress, the high cost of DEI and basically hiring people focused on DEI. When I said diversity hiring in my title, I didn't just mean that you specifically hire a president of your university based on their, boxes that you can check for diversity. I meant also hiring people committed to DEI or DEIB, which is for belonging. That carries a high cost. If that is the number one commitment of the person you hire to run your university or somebody you hire to teach at your university or college or school for that matter, everything else is going to come second. Everything will be seen through that lens of diversity, equity, inclusion, including academic excellence. That's going to change based on that mindset, that worldview, if you will. So let's just take a quick look at what has happened in the aftermath of the testimony last week, which I'm going to go out on a limb and assume most of you have seen. This is the Ivy League presidents from Harvard, MIT, UPenn, who sat in front of Congress and Elise Stefanik specifically, and could not answer the question, is it a violation of your code of conduct to call for the genocide of Jews? Is that not a violation? And they couldn't say yes. They kept saying it depends. It depends on the context, blah, 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 blah. And I submit to you that this was not some new thing. People are like, oh my gosh, they did these things. They said these horrible things, or they didn't say things they should have said. And, we need to punish them for that. This is nothing new, guys. This is just the logical conclusion of hiring people committed to diversity and equity and inclusion above all else. And yes, I think if you hire the specific person for that reason, it's even worse, because now you're not even getting a highly qualified president of your university who deserves to be president of your university, all that commitment notwithstanding. Because I like to believe that a person truly qualified to be president of Harvard, for example, when asked specifically, as she was asked, does it violate your code of conduct? Now, this is the head administrator of your entire university. Amongst their other jobs is to make sure that you A, have a code of conduct, and that B, it is properly enforced consistently, because the buck is going to stop on your desk if it's not and something bad happens. Your students, there's violence on your campus, there's horrible vandalism on your campus, something terrible happens, that is going to land squarely on your desk. So if your policies are not being enforced, as if they're not being enforced at all, if they're not being enforced equitably or fairly across the board, that's going to land on your desk. So a highly qualified candidate who understands the English language and understands what accountability means and understands what, equal access, equal rights, civil rights, equality under the law, these kind of concepts mean, would at least say, yes, it's a violation of our code of conduct to call for the genocide of Jews. There's really no equivocating about that. Saying it depends might come after that. If you're talking about how we're going to enforce that, maybe you can have a chat about the nuances. But to simply, when it's a yes or no answer, is it a violation of your code of conduct? When we know they have speech codes on campus, the answer is yes. And a person who understands English properly and isn't just so ideologically captured and or stupid, and I mean a certain kind of stupid, not literally low IQ, but the kind of stupid that says, I don't have to follow the rules. I don't have to recognize reality because I'm above everybody. I'm everybody's better. That's a special kind of stupid. And I submit to you that's what they were. So I think they were diversity hires for all the wrong reasons. But that aside, they were certainly committed to diversity. Let's take a look at what's happened since. Now, you may recall, I've had a guest on this show a couple of times, Brad Thompson. He is a professor at Clemson University. He heads up the Center for the Study of Capitalism and the Lyceum Scholars. And he's also written a couple of books, or actually several books. He has a blog, The Redneck Intellectual. Strongly advise that you follow him. He covers education, edwatchdaily.com, or I think it's .com or .org maybe. But he's been keeping tabs on this because as an academic who is committed to truth and reality and all the things that we would hope academics would be committed to, he's rightfully frustrated and embarrassed by his fellow academics who sat there in front of Congress and made complete asses out of themselves. So it looks like he was corresponding with people he knows at Harvard. And he put this out yesterday. I've received from inside Harvard sources a smoking gun. August 20th, 2020 memo from Claudine Gay, now Harvard president, to the Faculty of Arts and Sciences when she was dean. Now, I don't want to spend too much time reading through all of this. Suffice to say, if you go follow Brady's account as public, you will see that this is from her. It's very long, but it specifically speaks to the profound opportunity for institutional change that should not and cannot be squandered. Squandered. That's kind of like wasted, which is kind of like don't let a crisis go to waste. Sound familiar? Does it? Yeah. Rahm Emanuel. So, no, actually, sorry. Was that Rahm Emanuel? Yeah, I think it was Rahm Emanuel said that. One of the Emanuels. Anyway, the national conversation around racial equity continues to gain momentum, and the unprecedented scale of mobilization and demand for justice that she imagined in her alternate universe, because I don't recall that. The demand for justice might have been in the streets by BLM, but as far as mainstream America was not having a moment. We really weren't. This was an activist moment broadcast by mainstream media, made to look bigger than it was. The average person was busy just trying to figure out how they were going to deal with the fact that their schools were locked down. They were forced to wear masks. I mean, remember, this is COVID time. So George Floyd's brutal murder, by the way, it's since been shown that he wasn't brutally murdered. Manslaughter at most, maybe, perhaps, but even that's debatable at this point. So she says, I write today to share my personal commitment to this transformational project. Now, this is when she is the dean. If you're wondering what her position was here, she was Edgerly Family Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. And Brad is saying that he suspects that, he says, This is Gay's agenda for Harvard, which means for the rest of American higher education. Gay obviously should be fired, but that's not enough. Her ideological agenda must be opposed and tossed in the dustbin of history. Correct. But he also says that this memo not only exposes her hypocrisy and duplicity, I mean, she had a plan, she had an agenda from the jump, but also the real source of what makes her and those like her, she's not alone, the most destructive force in American higher education. This memo is a blueprint for the intellectual corruption and politicization of a once great institution, and it laid the groundwork for the anti-Semitism and the anti-Americanism rampant at Harvard today. And what he's saying too is we must face a stunning possibility that she got the job precisely because she holds these views. She made it no secret. This is before she was made president. She said what she wanted to do just within the Faculty of Arts and Sciences as the dean. She wanted to amplify teaching and research on racial and ethnic inequality. She wanted to reactivate a cluster hire in ethnicity and indigeneity and migration with the goal of making 4 new faculty appointments. She wanted to get into, now this is the weirdest thing, a task force. She wanted to launch a task force on visual culture and signage to take up the consequential conversation. Build our capacity to pursue inclusive excellence as opposed to excellence. Can you truly have, ask yourself this, can you have real excellence that is exclusive? If you specifically exclude any particular kind of person, are you really going to produce excellence at your university? No. So why do you need inclusive? What, was Harvard openly discriminating against people before? No, it was not. It had standards, very high standards. And like most diversity, equity, inclusion pushers, she believed that underrepresentation was evidence in and of itself of discrimination, and she makes it clear. Staff leaders of color remain significantly underrepresented in the FAS, and we are missing out on this talent to our own detriment. How does she know? How does she know you're missing out on that talent? Are they talented because they're of color? Or does she have evidence, and I would submit that she did not, did she have evidence that people who are of extremely high caliber, above and beyond anybody not of color, were routinely getting turned down? And then one has to ask, why in 2021 was Harvard doing that? And why did she not light what's left of her hair on fire to the federal government to say, hey, there have been civil rights violations at Harvard in terms of hiring? Or at least to the Board of Trustees. To our knowledge, she did not do that. She just said, let's plow straight ahead with hiring people of color. Don't you have to prove that you're not doing that before you do it? No, because she wants representation, whatever that means. These initiatives are just a starting place. No kidding. Apparently, he wanted to go farther. So in any way, we're the authors of Harvard Future. How haughty and arrogant. We are the authors of Harvard's future. How about the students at Harvard being the authors of Harvard's future? As it used to be. The excellence you produce ought to be the authors of your future. But no, apparently not. So what has happened now, you may notice that he tagged a lot of people up here. Representative Stefanik, Elon Musk, Bill Ackman, we'll talk about him in a moment, Chris Rufo, Chris Burnett, etc., Matt Taibbi. What's happened? 650 plus Harvard professors have signed a letter to the Harvard Corporation in support of the President Claudine Gay. Some commenters have said, thank you for giving us a list of who else to look closely at as far as their, whether they're qualified for their jobs. 650 people are supporting her. And when you find out what comes next about her doctoral thesis, then you'll really wonder about these 650 people. He says, Harvard is now in crisis. The Harvard board is now stuck between a rock and a hard place. This is one of those high costs I was talking about. If they fire Gay, who's also now accused of plagiarism, that's what we're going to get to, the faculty will be in revolt. That's a lot of people. 650 professors. If they keep her, the university will be saddled in a national disgrace. The faculty letter is also proof that firing Gay will have no effect on the moral, intellectual culture at Harvard. They have taken it over. When we talk about institutional capture, this is what it looks like. This is what it looks like. Capture is not hyperbole. They have quite literally captured it. So that's 650 professors who believe the exact same thing she does, as Oceana 23 says right here. Absolutely accurate. We can surmise that if you don't agree with her. People say, no, they're just sticking up for her even though they don't agree with her. Yeah, but that would be, I'm sticking up for you even though I don't agree with you that screaming about genocide of an entire people is okay. OPS plagiarizing your doctoral thesis is fine too. I find that hard to believe. So yeah, and it's also not much diversity. Oceana 23 continues. So speaking of, speaking of the plagiarism situation, Chris Rufo then took the information about Claudine Gay, started to get suspicious, started looking back at her record, and he's asking now, is she a plagiarist? Now, I think it's great of him to ask the question, but that may be for his own protection, just to be on the extra safe side that somebody isn't going to decide to sue him. But to me, go ahead, sue me. I got nothing. Yes, she's a plagiarist. So, touted as the first Black woman to run the nation's most prestigious university, she assumed leadership with high expectations, but her tenure, which began this summer, has been mired in scandal. As dean and then President Gay has been accused of bullying colleagues, suppressing free speech, overseeing a racist admissions program. She just announced she was going to do that, and following the Hamas terror campaign against Israel, failing to stand up to rampant anti-Semitism on campus. Now, speaking of her racism, what isn't getting a lot of coverage, and I wish I'd grabbed a clip, is her talking about segregated housing on campus. There was another discussion during the same testimony, period in front of Congress, where a Black member of Congress, I don't remember which one, asked her, does she have segregated housing on campus, and mentioned some examples of the segregated housing. She said, well, we call it positive selection. It's positive selection, y'all. The students initiate it. Okay. So white students decide to have the White House where they're all going to live together, and the white club, and the, white Europeans only gathering or whatever. Is that positive selection? Or is that a little bit of racism? So, again, selective with her outrage, and with her, what's positive and what's negative, what's racial exclusion, what's inclusion, anyway. So moving on, he says she published her dissertation, Taking Charge, Black Electoral Success and the Redefinition of American Policies, in 97 as part of her doctorate in political science from Harvard. The paper deals with white-Black political representation and racial attitudes as evaluated under the university's plagiarism policy, which he links to, and I'll put this in the description below. You can go look at it all you like. In fact, you know what? I'll throw it on into the chat over here, and y'all can take a look at it at your leisure, what Harvard's policy is. The paper contains at least 3 problematic patterns of usage and citation. First, Gay lifts an entire paragraph nearly verbatim. Okay. And then there's language from her work. So if you compare and contrast, look at the words. They are almost identical. And she's not using quotation marks. Now, she cites the work. She provides a reference to the original authors, but her words are so close to theirs without quotation marks that that's a violation of Harvard's policy. And she does this 3 times. 3 times. As I said, I don't have time to go through every little thing, but that's something that she is now beleaguered with, that she's being accused of plagiarism. Shocking that Harvard didn't know this, or when vetting her, check it out and double, triple, quadruple check. We've had problems with plagiarism in positions of power, Joe Biden, for so long. And when people get into positions of, some kind of a scandal or crisis, or people don't like them, the first thing that people go to is, did this person plagiarize? Did this person lie? Is there any skeleton in their closet? Why the university didn't do this, or if they did, decided it didn't matter, is beyond my comprehension. But there's a high cost to placing diversity, and her being the first Black woman, and her being all for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, above doing a super thorough vetting process to make sure you're not going to get into this trouble, because now that's something else to add to it. As he pointed out, 650 professors want to keep her. You've got an accusation of plagiarism. You've got a policy that makes clear you don't just cite. You've got to quote. You've got to really segregate what someone else said and what you said. And if you change the wording, you better change it. Really change it. I'm talking hardcore. Paraphrasing's not really enough if you only change 1 or 2 words and keep everything else verbatim. You can keep the essence. That's it. And especially for an Ivy League doctoral thesis. Considering this is a woman who talks about things like microaggression and cultural appropriation, like they're real, like you can steal somebody else's culture. What is this exactly? Stealing somebody's research? That's okay. So that happened. Then you start getting into millionaires and billionaires getting pissed off. So we've got, you can't fire her because our faculty doesn't want you to fire her. Everyone's pissed off at her because she can't, answer a straight question that should be a simple yes. And maybe she's a plagiarist. Well, now we have this. Bill Ackman, if you're not familiar, is the CEO of Pershing Square. Okay, so this is big. Lots of money. He writes to the members of the Harvard governing boards. Again, a very long letter, very detailed. He references, which is noteworthy. He references. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm going to pull this up because I just caught my eye. Adrian says, there's an article about anti-plagiarism being oppressive and racist. I just saw one today. It's from at least the one I saw is from 2022. And a professor somewhere argued, is from Campus Reform publication. A professor argued that, anti-plagiarism rules and all that kind of stuff unfairly discriminate against Black, brown, and this was more recent. If you find it, let me know, because I found the one from 2022 and I was already like, what? So yeah, maybe that'll be their argument. You're persecuting her. She has to use quotation marks and she should be able to lift other people's work. So anyway, so he references in his letter, which I thought was noteworthy, Larry Tribe. Now, Larry Tribe is a very left-leaning guy. He's a traditional liberal from way back. And even he says, her hesitant, formulaic, and bizarrely evasive answers were deeply troubling to me. And I'm not even showing it. Sorry. Let me show it to you. Yeah, here it is. Scrolling down. Wait a minute. Is this his? Yeah. So I got to get down. Here we go. Her hesitant, formulaic, and bizarrely evasive answers were deeply troubling to me and many of my colleagues, students, and friends. President Gay's failures have led to billions of dollars of canceled, paused, and withdrawn donations to the university. I'm personally aware of more than $1 billion of terminated donations from a small group of Harvard's most generous Jewish and non-Jewish. It's very important to say that because people are accusing Jewish alumni of, holding Harvard for ransom and all this other thing and, bullying them with money. And I'm over here going, what took them so long? I have been copied and blind copied in numerous letters and emails to the university, etc. And so there's a growing sense that, like I said, should have been there ages and ages and ages ago, but welcome back. Welcome to the light over here. That they should stop funding people who hate us, meaning Jews, but also Americans. Just Americans who want to remain Americans, not globalists, global citizens, UNESCO stooges, labor stock, 21st century citizens, whatever the hell you want to call us. Maybe we should stop funding those people. And that's what DEI does. DEI marginalizes the vast majority, I believe, of the population of this country, of all races, ethnicities, creeds, etc., who would like to remain Americans. And when I say Americans, I mean Americans committed to the idea that we should have individual freedom, that we should have equal opportunity, not equal outcomes, that equal outcomes and communism and Marxism are sort of antithetical to Americanism. And they are teaching our kids to hate that. We should stop funding it. It just so happens that the most noticeable evidence of that right up front is this: it's okay to pick on Jewish students. Jews have traditionally been the tip of the spear for Western culture in non-Western spaces or with anti-Enlightenment ideas like Marxism. And the fact that some Jews have been Marxists in the past, meaning people born Jewish, but then they said, don't want to be Jewish anymore, I'm going to be a Marxist. And yes, they're incompatible. You really aren't both, because Judaism if you're a Jew in any meaningful sense, has very traditional values, very Western Enlightenment values. Anything other than that simply isn't. All right. So people go, but there's Jews that are Marxists, whatever. They gave up being Jews. Just like you wouldn't call Joe Biden a good Catholic. You wouldn't call somebody who gave up being Muslim to become a Marxist a Muslim Marxist. You'd call them a Marxist. Islamists are very close. They're kind of both because Islamism is sort of, the same plus the mystical, components to it. But you just don't do that. We don't walk around saying this is an example of that. So it just so happens to first be mostly rich people like that. But there's also this guy. Columbia University billionaire investor and Omega Advisors CEO Leon Cooperman, who is saying basically that, and let me share this tab with you. There he is. He says he's pulling his Columbia funding amid student protests. These kids have shit for brains. So that's his take on it. They're losing a bunch of money. Harvard and UPenn donor revolt is raising money in general about big money on campuses. So now what people are wondering is, okay, if donors can pull their money from these universities and direct, what's going on there, maybe there's too much money involved, donor money involved in these schools. No, it should be in the free market. It should be open to this that's what the marketplace of ideas is. What we should be concerned about, in fact, is the amount of federal money that's funding this crap, the amount of our taxpayer money that's funding this crap. I'm not concerned about a billionaire who's saying, I'm not giving you $100 million for a building with my name on it. That's his money. And a school, if they're a private school, should have to earn that money. They have to earn that loyalty and earn that money. That's the free market and the marketplace of ideas. The one we say that free speech is designed to, operate in and protect. Well, it ceases to be a free market of anything when the federal government is propping it up so much. And even these allegedly private schools like Harvard get a ton of federal subsidy in the form of taxpayer subsidized and guaranteed loans for the students, grants, and all kinds of title funds, all kinds of earmarked money for all these, civil rights. You civil rights regulate people, even private institutions like Harvard, then you give them money. And when they stop protecting people's civil rights, as they've obviously done, you take the money away. So they should be defunded by everyone, in my opinion, but especially the government. And what private citizens want to do is what private citizens want to do. If there were more productive billionaires who happen to be hardcore Marxists, there are some, obviously, then they wouldn't have concerns about losing the Jewish capitalist money because they would be losing, they could be getting it from the Marxists. So there's that. Then we have this, which has gotten a lot of press, the UPenn donor canceling the $100 million gift. I was very annoyed with him because first he threatened, I'm going to take it away if you don't fire her. Dude, if you genuinely believe that she is the cause rather than a symptom, then I'm not really sure that you're smart enough to be doing anything that you're doing. You need to take a step back and examine reality. I think this is great. They're taking the $100 million away, but it really pissed me off that what if they'd gone ahead and fired her in time? Maybe he's gone back on it and now given the $100 million because they did fire her. But guess what? She's still a tenured member of the faculty. So she's still there. She's a symptom. If Harvard has 650, Penn has as many, if not more. So where has he been? If you have $100 million to give to a single institution for a building or otherwise, you need to do your due diligence on what are they, what are they teaching there, dude? Do you not care? Do you just want to be like, I give a building to Penn? I'm not one to pick on the rich, but when they do dumb shit, I'm going to pick on them. And this would be dumb shit. Even planning to give them $100 million when we all know who paid any attention at all. And I went to University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education. It is toxic, and it's been toxic for 30 years at least, minimum. We can go all the way back to Dewey. Had I been smarter at the age of 23, I wouldn't have gone there. As it is, tune in on Christmas Day. I will be burning my diploma. That is not a joke. Yes, I will. I'll be live streaming it. It is that worthless to me. Whatever I have of value of the time spent there is up here. And that piece of paper makes me sick to my stomach. So I'm going to show them what it's worth as a credential to me, which is kindling. So there's that happened. Then we have Fareed Zakaria, who's come out from a long history of, kind of being on the side of the public schools and on the side of all this stuff. And he actually was great. America's top universities should abandon their long misadventure into politics, retrain their gaze on their core strengths, and be real reputations as centers of research and learning and excellence and all that. I recommend that you watch his take. It's excellent. And we should welcome him back to the reality now that he's figured it out. So I'll just take a moment and say that if you run into people who at least admit, wait a minute, slow your roll. This is bad. We got to turn around and go back. Show them a little bit of grace. You might wonder, where have you been and everything, but let's be glad for this. Just don't allow the gaslighters. The people who say, I never said that. What do you mean? No, I've always said this. I've always thought woke stuff was bad. No. Don't let them get away with rewriting history. And that's going to happen. So I would agree, but with somebody like Fareed, who here he is, you want to kind of welcome him back. And that's on CNN. You can go find his Fareed's take, U.S. universities are pursuing political agenda. And then we go to the White House. This cracks me up. I'm not going to, watch the video of this, but the White House condemns university presidents after contentious congressional hearing. The presidents of Harvard University, blah, 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 had an increase in it. So the White House is now coming, oh, that's bad. Oh, as if they didn't know. As if they didn't know. It's unbelievable that this needs to be said. Calls for genocide are monstrous and antithetical to everything we represent in the country. They are desperate to distance themselves from this garbage. So that basically covers that. The cost is 500 years of high regard and esteem. About 500-year history for Harvard. Billions of dollars likely being put in a position to have to fire hundreds of members of your faculty, or at least, not fire your president. What are you going to do? I mean, if they fire her, the faculty be in revolt, just like he said. So it's bad. It's bad. The assumption they made that everybody agrees with them at all times, their hubris is what led to this. And now I'm going to pivot to the next part of this show to illustrate how this happens, what this kind of hubris looks like in terms of curriculum and what we are teaching to K-12 and to teachers of K-12, who then are going to go on to become, go college student, the students will become college students. Some of the teachers, may go back to graduate school, may become professors. The people who put this stuff together often are ed school professors or people who've left ed school to go produce curriculum. They're all operating in this incestuous little cesspool. So let's take a look, shall we? This is called Voices in Ethnic Studies survey course, basically. Now Voices, just so you know, is one of several programs in the diversity offering of this Gibbs Smith education company. They have movement, voices, and the issue. There's Lois, the AI. And they have different things. And before we're done today, I am going to show you a little bit of the issues because it's scary. I thought voices was scary. Then I started poking around in the issue and I was like, oh my God. Okay. So in an event, but today we're going to go through voices. And before I show you the front end, kind of the marketing side of this, how they're selling this to schools, how they're, because that's what they're doing. This is selling it to schools, possibly to school boards or parents who are going to then go to schools, whatever. But mostly they're selling it to schools. And so it's slick and it's got all kinds of cool stuff. And we could go over this. I could certainly make a whole show going through the marketing material. I'll quickly go through it when we're done. But I want to spend our time going through the actual thing, going through the sample they give you that they're very proud of. They're very proud of it. I want to go through one of the units, the actual first unit of it. It has, I think, 6 or 7 units, but they give you the whole first one, all 55 pages. And so I spent a few hours actually today going through it and taking notes to be able to talk to you about each and every one of these pages. Obviously, I'm not going to spend tons of time on each page, but I'm going to point out the salient points. Please feel free to take notes for real. Take some notes so that if you want to go back and show this to somebody else and explain why this or any other ethnic studies curriculum is a problem, you will have the language to do so. Now, I'm going through voices, but honestly, all of them are like this. This one is just the slickest, the prettiest one I've seen in a long time. It's also one of the most honest ones I've seen in a long time, in terms of putting it right out there what they're doing. And I think you may be able to explain to people what your problem is with it very well if you pay close attention and you take some notes. So here we go. Going to the first thing, you'll notice here a timeline. Now on this timeline, which basically says, let me kind of make it a little smaller here. This is the first for unit 1, but it's also like the first lesson, the essential question. So race and ethnicity is the unit we're going through today. I'm not going to show you intersectionality, understanding, because they don't give us all that to look at. They're just letting us look at this first one, race and ethnicity. So they give you a timeline here. The essential question, what are they? Of this unit is what are race and ethnicity and how have they changed over time? So understand that what they're teaching your students, your children, or taxpayers' children, if you're just a taxpayer and you're paying for other people's kids to go to school so they can learn how, to hate you. Anyway, in this country is at the end of this unit, the kids are going to know what this company and the producers of this think race and ethnicity are and why they're important. So that's what you need to understand about this. Now, this timeline is fascinating because you'll notice it begins 1860. Every single thing on here is Marxist. I mean, to be overly simplistic. One of the first things, they show Howard University is chartered. So that's a Black university. Nothing else happened, apparently, between 1860 and 1903 when W.E.B. Du Bois was born. Now, who is W.E.B. Du Bois? Well, he's a communist. Okay. He's an author and a civil rights activist, and, he was into Pan-Africanism and, but ultimately the man became a communist. And, towards the end of his life, I'm going to show you this. He became a communist. This is the Communist Party USA. There he is, African-American communist, W.E.B. Du Bois. This talks about him in glowing terms. And there's even something from the archives of the New York Times that talks about how at 93, so it's not like, most people, like, they start off young, they're a communist, they join the Communist Party, and then they kind of outgrow it. Thomas Sowell. But not him. He joined it at a time when it was, coming under fire, but he was his whole life a socialist, his whole life a communist. He just didn't officially join the party until it was like, really dangerous to do so. The dude was committed. He was committed. So he joined the Communist Party. And as I said, you've got a situation where here in ethnic studies, they're making him very important. Then you have 1915, Carter-Woodson, Racial Integrity Act. This is a very bad thing in American history, the Racial Integrity Act. Let's pull it out. Let's pull out the most ugly, horrible thing there is. Let's put it on the timeline. Compulsory sterilization, which was a function of the Racial Integrity Act. Let's put that on there. Yeah, that's really ugly and bad. Nothing else happened this whole time period. Nothing else is going on except really bad stuff. Now we get all the way up to, we're going to skip a lot of years, and we're going to go to Paulo Freire, Marxist, Brazilian educator, publishes Pedagogy of the Press. He and W.B. Du Bois are featured most prominently in this entire unit. They're the people mentioned most frequently and with the most glowing, approbation. 1969, the first ethnic studies program created, blah, blah, blah. So they go to Kimberly Crenshaw. So we're going to jump from 69 to 89 to, now we have some more bad things. that happen to people. And then Kimberly Crenshaw, intersectionality, right? Then we're going to jump ahead to the 90s and talk about the inclusion of Black history. And then we're going to jump ahead to ethnic studies, and we're going to jump ahead to all these other things. Okay. So why does this matter? Well, because what you're going to see throughout this is you're going to see that this not only is teaching ethnic studies and like what is race and what is ethnicity, but it's marketing ethnic studies to the kids. They make a case for ethnic studies and make ethnic studies itself one of the victims, one of the marginalized victims that we need to protect. What's missing from all this? There's no mention of emancipation. So we're back to 1860. There's no mention of the Emancipation Proclamation or the Civil War. There's no mention of Harry S. Truman desegregating the military. There's not even mention of Brown v. Board of Education in the timeline. They kind of mention it, like in the thing, in this little unit a little bit. We're going to like mention it in fleet, in passing. But they don't mention that Thurgood Marshall was the attorney, a Black attorney in the 50s. For the case, he won, and he went on to become the first Black Supreme Court justice, but we're not going to mention him. They don't mention really any other Black high achievers or anything, or other ethnicities, anything of triumph, anything positive. It's always about struggle and documentation of struggle. So is the timeline about understanding race and ethnicity or the history of ethnic studies itself? You be the judge. I think it's the latter. So now let's go on to the next page. And as I said, this is going to be, I'm going through this in detail. So I hope you all will be able to stick with me. Lesson 1. This is an actual lesson for actual students. Comprehension strategy. Now, as a teacher, I can tell you that when you set forth for students, here's what we want you to understand from this lesson. Kids are going to think, okay, this is what I'm going to be tested on. This is what I need to know. Like, this is what they're going to pay attention to. Not just what they're going to pay attention to, but they're actually telling them how to take notes. Now get a load of this. I'm going to read this and I want to see if you guys can figure it out. As you read, here we go. Taking notes, it's important, blah, blah. It says, it can also help you track which parts of a text sparked curiosity, passion, or indignation. Indignation. Why would you suggest to students that what they're about to read is going to spark indignation if you didn't want it to? We're going to plant that idea in your head. As you read this lesson, choose one color to indicate important facts, another to indicate that you have questions about a subject. That's standard stuff. Mnemonic devices use color coding. Teachers often recommend that. But then they get to and indicate that the text created a strong emotional response from you. Again, power of suggestion. What you're about to read is going to upset you. So the student is thinking it should upset me, or if it doesn't, then what's wrong with me? They're putting it out there. It's a subtle kind of manipulation through language. And then they have down here learning goals. Each of these lessons has learning goals, and I'll show you what they are for each one, and they get progressively more insistent that you feel what they want you to feel, you think what they want you to think. This one's, they start with I can. So if you don't agree or you don't see things the way they see them, then you can't do the thing that you were supposed to do. You have not achieved the objective. I can define the terms race and ethnicity by their definition. I can explain how categories in race have changed over time by their definition. I can analyze what it means to be white in the United States, which is the thing, according to them. No ability to challenge that. It is a thing. I'm going to tell you what it is. I can analyze how race shapes life in the United States. We presume that it does. We presume that it does. So all of these are presumptions. This is the vocabulary they have to learn. Now, I want to be very clear that there are grains of truth in here. There's a lot of truth in here. There are a lot of things they're saying that are like, yeah, that actually happened. And yes, that is true. It's what they do with the truth. James Lindsay talks about this all the time. They take something that's true and then they wrap it in a bunch of lies, or they wrap it in an interpretation. So they have plausible deniability, that Mott and Bailey. I'm going to tell you this thing that is true. And then, I'm going to like say something really awful about it. And I can always retreat to, but it's true. So they talk about, equality is the principle that all human beings have inherent worth and rights that must be respected. Who would deny that? This shared equality and humanity does not mean that we're all the same, though. Who would deny that? Our brains love to sort and categorize information. Who would deny that? So you see, they say things that are true. But then they go on to talk about, notice how they highlight the words in yellow that they want you to notice. So that's another little trick. You go color codes your stuff, but we're going to color code as very, very important the things we want to stand out to you: race, ethnicity, cultures. They do this often. And so this, what is really strange about what they do here is they wrap all this truth, even about ethnic food, and and then they get to the point. Some ethnic food aisles, some view ethnic food aisles as legacies of colonialism. They put that idea in your head. Some view, some think. People say in recent years there's been a growing effort. They don't provide any evidence of that. There's no citation. There's no proof that this is true. So you get this like building sense of consensus that may or may not exist. The student is not getting any other perspective other than this one. All right, now we're getting over to this is some really highly scientific stuff. Most of it is pretty true, et cetera, et cetera. But this is the part that gets me. The what do you think questions. Why can race be an uncomfortable topic for some? How comfortable are you with talking about issues of race? Let's put you on the spot and ask you, how comfortable are you? They do this a lot in this curriculum. They do it a lot. And now we get to this. They bring a woman who was sterilized as part of eugenics, which is really sort of shocking to me because she doesn't look old enough to have been sterilized during the eugenics movement, but they, whatever. Certainly we can all agree that medical mistreatment of people and forced sterilization is terrible. But where were these people when we were being forced to have vaccines, wear masks, and where are they on affirming little kids' gender identities and giving them hormones, which sterilizes them? And adults telling them this is their identity. How is that not a social construct being foisted upon young children and then them engaging in a certain kind of eugenics, sort of inside out eugenics, but the sterilization is the same. So, and then they do all this stuff, ever changing categories. They have these things, consider this. And, that the government wants to use this like blood way to decide who would be, a real Indian or whatever. They don't pose the really important question, which is, why are we having the federal government hand out benefits to groups of people based on tribal membership at all? And some people say, well, it's reparations for all the horrible things that were done to Native Americans. Okay, well, then you tell me how you're going to figure out who's a Native American. Same as you're going to tell me how you're going to figure out who would get reparations if we started paying them to people of color. What would be your process? What would be the blood quantity of black blood that you would get from being ADOS, so an American descendant of slave, in order to get those reparations? Where are you going to figure it out? How are you going to take a Pantone color chip and stick it to the person's arm? So the problem with tying some kind of benefit to a racial category, a marginalized category, or historically this, that, the other, when the person is no longer alive, who was actually wronged, is you got to come up with something. So what are you going to do? But they don't have that nuanced conversation, do they? So then they're getting into defining whiteness. This is where it gets really creepy. So they talk about Toni Morrison in here, and I'm trying to think where the quote was. It might be later. But they talk about, yeah, here it is. In this country, American means white. Everyone else has to hyphenate. Says who? Like, for real, says who? When my ancestors came here from Russia and they were Jewish, as soon as they were naturalized citizens, my grandfather told me they couldn't wait to call themselves Americans. They were not, they were not considered white either legally or socially. because they're not wrong. Remember, the truth that's in here is that historically, there, no Irish need apply. Irish weren't considered white. Eastern Europeans weren't considered white. Jews weren't considered white by that definition at the time. But it didn't change what the people thought they were. They thought they were American. They called themselves American. As long as they were American citizens, they were American. And after one generation, even when they still weren't citizens, if they were still here, they brought over the, parents, whatever, they were American, damn it. So for her to presume to know everyone else has to hyphenate, bullshit. And you don't get to speak for everybody. And people, just because your government defines you a certain way, my government defines me as a domestic terrorist. That doesn't make me one. I don't walk around identifying as that or feeling of internalized self-loathing because my government says this about me. If you do that, that's on you. But she is projecting onto everybody the sense of like, oh, you don't get to be an American. So, I just find that she looks down on people. In fact, this looks down on people who consider themselves raceless. They go into a lot of depth on race as a social construct and then don't allow us to reject the social construct. So if I sit here and say, as a white looking person, I reject racism, I reject the social construct of race, I refuse to live my life by it and look at other people that way, I choose to do that. I reject the social construct. How is it any different than a woman who wants to wear pants and change her name to Bob? If I'm rejecting a social construct, that's my business. You don't get to tell me that I'm wrong to think I'm raceless just because other people want to see me a certain way. No, I want to see myself the way I want to see myself and everybody else. But she doesn't allow for that. Now we get into the Jewish Americans. They cover it, like, oh, facing discrimination, et cetera. They talk about how Jews weren't considered white and then show some Black Jews. I'm actually glad they did that because not all Jews are white skinned. But what's interesting is they spotlight, all the spotlights in here, by the way, are left-wing people. Every single one. Every single one is not just left, but hard left. What surprises me, however, is that they skipped over Louis Brandeis, who was the first Jewish Supreme Court justice, hardcore social justice warrior, and they just skipped him. But maybe it's because they were focusing on intersectionality and they wanted a Jewish woman, right? So not enough to just be a Jewish Supreme Court justice, even though he was made a Supreme Court justice like very early in our history as far as making any kind of racial amends. So, I just find that interesting. There he is again, W.B. Du Bois. Do they say anything? They call him a progressive. He was a progressive. Sounds a lot softer than communist, doesn't it? He was definitely a communist. He was always a communist. They don't even mention that he was a socialist. Don't you find that a little dishonest? So when I said they're the most honest, I meant they're the most honest about putting their racism right out there for you to see, but they're very dishonest about who these people really were. So they don't tell you that. Now let's look at these lesson content connections. Look closely at the questions. Why were the concept of race and racial categories constructed, according to us? Repeat back what we said. There's no room for you to say, well, I think of a few other reasons other than what you told me, but they won't have any answer that is other than what they were taught. How has race impacted, like meteors, to the moon's surface? How has race impacted racially marginalized groups in the United States, according to us? They have nothing to compare to. And now they want you to do some rhetorical analysis. This is fascinating. All the writing assignments in here are fascinating. Before discussing potentially sensitive topics, it's a good idea to set shared expectations and procedures. With your instructor and classmates, discuss the goals of your conversation and ways to support these goals on a rhetorical level. So we're going to tone police ourselves before we even start talking. We're going to make sure that everyone being, the right kind of comfortable is okay. Unless you're really uncomfortable talking about race because you reject the social construct of race, see yourself as raceless because you're white. That's not okay. You need to be uncomfortable. So it just, how can students challenge each other's beliefs or opinions while still being respectful? Well, for starters, you can't challenge them if you're white. Notice anything? Okay. Show of hands, class. Show of hands, class. Do you notice anything about their literary luminaries? What do you notice? What do you notice? Anyone? Anyone? I'm testing you now. This is your quiz. This is your quiz. People in the chat, what do you see on this page? I'm going to try to make it a little bigger for you. If you're having trouble seeing these people, what do you see? What do you see? Yes, commies. Commies, yes. Anything else? Every single one of them, not only are they all pretty much communists, but they're all really controversial. So that it's not just that they're, communist writers. These are people that are not what you would call mainstream. They're trying to make them mainstream, but they're not mainstream. These are not mainstream thinkers. These are not people that have passed the test of time, people we want to turn to learn things about our culture, our history, etc. No, they're best-selling authors or super duper famous communists. Okay, but that's basically it. So once again, we have W.B. Du Bois. This is pretty much the W.B. Du Bois, Du Bois. Sorry, I say Du Bois because I think that's how they pronounced it when he was alive, but it's Du Bois. We have Ta-Nehisi Coates. What do you guys know about Ta-Nehisi Coates? Know anything about him? No? Okay. Well, we're gonna have a little chat. We're gonna have a little chat about Ta-Nehisi Coates over here. This is him. This is from, I put it in speed reader so I don't have to look at ads. But The Toxic World of Ta-Nehisi Coates. This is originally from Politico. By Rich Lowry. This is from 2015. Okay. And again, I'll put the link in the description. You can read the whole thing if you want. But he's talking about his worldview. His worldview. He says he argues, although it might be too generous a word, it's more like assertion shrouded in a haze of lyricism, that all that other Black people did to hurt or threaten him was ultimately the product of white racism. So even when a Black person hurt him, it was because of white people. Given how large race hatred looms in the world of Coates, I was surprised to find the worst thing that evidently happened to him directly at the hands of a white person is recounted beginning on page 93 of the 152-page book. Coates took his son to a movie theater on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and when they were leaving and got off the crowded elevator, a white woman pushed his kid and said, "Come on." This would anger any parent, and Coates got into it with the woman and a white man who came to her defense, pushing the guy in the resulting argument. Coates interprets this incident as essentially the telescoping of hundreds of years of racism down to this woman pulling rank and invoking her right over the body of my son. Yeah, maybe, or maybe not. It's also possible the woman was a jerk. So, but in the world of Ta-Nehisi Coates, we don't teach our students that there are people who are jerks and there are people who are nice. We teach them if the person being jerky is white, it's because of hundreds of years of racism. So, it's this America's a syndicated array, or a syndicate arrayed to protect its exclusive power to dominate and control our bodies, he writes. What is this white America? Is it Nancy Pelosi or Ted Cruz? Is it Massachusetts or is it Utah? Is it supporters of affirmative action or its opponents? Is it teachers who work in the inner city or gap-toothed yokels who chortle over racist jokes? So it's like, it doesn't matter. White America, everybody. And of course, he cheered on 9/11. He writes of the police and firefighters who died running into the burning buildings in a forlorn effort to save all the people whose bodies were about to be obliterated into dust. They were not human to me. Black, white, or whatever, they were menaces of nature. They were the fire, the comet, the storm, which could, with no justification, shatter my body. Okay, he's a very, very bad person, in my opinion. Okay, so that's Ta-Nehisi Coates. And the students are being taught that he's a luminary. He's a literary luminary. Okay. He's a very racist person. I hope I don't have to go into Miss White Fragility over there, Robin DiAngelo. Right. But just notice that there's nothing in all of this that challenges the narrative. So these are quotes from these people. This is one of hers. Whites consistently choose to enjoy racial segregation, living, working, and playing. Somewhere out there beyond the firmament, blah, 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 blah. The nation has not yet found its peace. Old Miss Die Hard. Everything they've said here is presented as, here you go, kids, either as fact or as something really important you need to pay attention to. There's nobody challenging this. They don't even juxtapose, like I said, Thomas Sowell or Walter E. Williams or Shelby Steele or any number of other people they could juxtapose against these people. How about, can we possibly hear, if we're going to do W.B. Du Bois, could we also perhaps hear from, other people from the same time period that he lived who disagreed with him? They existed. But no, there's not even, notice who's missing? Notice anyone missing here? Martin Luther King Jr., nowhere to be found. And it continues with Ibram X. Kendi. This guy, he's representing Asians. What about Kenny Xu? He could be here. He's not here to talk about being Asian in America. And they've got everybody represented here. We got, him, and we got a woman about the invention of Latinos, and then somebody talking about Muslims. All right, now we get to intersectionality. As this goes on, it gets more insistent that what they're telling you is true. The comprehension strategy is now inserting the reader personally into this and suggesting that having to do research is somehow offensive, such that now knowing something, common knowledge, equals signs of oppression. Here's how they put that in there. It says, do you have to do research to understand concepts the author assumes are common knowledge? Does the text reinforce or undermine narratives you have heard in your community? So if you don't already know it, that might be that it's biased. If you have to do research to understand what they're talking about, that might indicate bias. So do you think students are likely to go look into things they've never heard of? Why would they? That might indicate bias. So this is a way of inoculating themselves against a kid coming across something that that doesn't agree with this, that they've never heard of before, and they can just keep looking at what they already know, or what they're told, and anything else. Well, I don't already know that because that's a white way of knowing, or that's something other kind of way of knowing. Then they want to insert the kid into this. They say, make a list of your identities and consider how they shape you as a reader. Assumption that they do. Assumption that my identity as a female, or as a Jewish female, if we're going to be all intersectional about it, a Jewish straight female who's 57 years old and a mother. I mean, how many different things, right? That shapes me as a reader. Why do you assume that? Isn't that a bias? Isn't that stereotyping? But they don't put that out there. And again, with the goals, I can describe the many parts of identity. What if I don't want to? According to us, I can define intersectionality according to us. And again, with ableism, affiliation, all the vocabulary words are loaded words that they are putting out there as if they're true, as if they represent concepts in fact. And here's sex, of course, the category assigned to people typically at birth. Assigned. So there's that. This is how they fracture the individual into parts. And they put forth the idea that they cannot simply be. They're burdened by the parts. And then they begin to have their cognitive distortion, assuming that any way that somebody else is treating them is because of those intersections. Anything I don't like, anything that's uncomfortable to me must be, and as long as the person doing that to me is even slightly different from me, it's because of those identities. So it basically assumes in every case that the cause of social, so that's there. Let's see. Here we go. This whole section is more about intersectionality. That's Kimberly Crenshaw, right? And this is all about protected classes. Now we know we don't have enough of them. She defines intersectionality. What is it? According to Crenshaw, it never says other people disagree. Just according to Crenshaw, this is what it is. Okay, we don't question that. We move on. Racism, sexism, notice still in yellow. Everything is in yellow. Then we get into a case. Now, this is fascinating to me. Again, the truth wrapped in a bunch of lies or a bunch of overgeneralizations. There was a 1976 case that where somebody sued General Motors saying they were discriminated against because they were, their argument was that Black women were the last hired and first fired because they were Black women, and that it was discrimination against Black employees, let's say. And it came back that no, they didn't discriminate because they still had a lot of Black employees. They just happened to be men. And according to Crenshaw, that's because legally they needed a new theory. They needed intersectionality to look at discrimination differently and say, oh, well, it's not good enough to have Black male employees at General Motors. Remember, this is General Motors. How many jobs were there that women at that time in 1976, when, believe it or not, most women still were mostly at home or raising their kids or still having babies, it wasn't a given that they weren't. Why is that the go-to? Could it also be that they didn't have a lot of Black women because there weren't a lot of Black women applicants, or there just weren't a lot of women applicants either? Did they look at how many white women there were working at General Motors? So she's arguing that because they had Black men, but not a lot of Black women, that's just proof that they were separately discriminating against Black women. Why? There could be any number of other reasons. But to her, that's what it was, and this was born. This whole wheel of nonsense, and I'm sure you've seen it. Your kids are seeing it all over their schools every day. This is not just existing in ethnic studies classrooms. This is in every classroom, but of course they put it right in here. This wheel demonstrates many facets of identity and the levels of power that go with them. Statement of fact. The levels of power that go with them. Now, if you're a kid, even a high school kid, and your teacher presents this to you with like, oh, look, these are the levels of power that go with being male all the time. Do you feel comfortable challenging that and saying, wait, what? No. That's not true. I bet you the thought isn't going to even occur to these kids. They're telling them it's true. And so then if they don't feel it's true, and when I say feel, I mean if they go outside into their world, they go home, they see their dad's out of a job, or they don't have a dad, or they, they're not doing so great, or something's going on that they don't feel like they have a lot of power, and they have that dissonance of, but I'm in the privileged class. I have white privilege. I have power. I have these things. I don't feel like I do. It's very uncomfortable. And you want to do something to alleviate that discomfort. So there are all kinds of maladaptive coping mechanisms that people can use to deal with the kind of discomfort that crops up when you can't challenge what someone's telling you, and it creates discomfort. See, they want people to be uncomfortable, and they go, this is important. You should be uncomfortable. As a teacher, I'll say, I don't think you should protect children from all the kinds of intellectual and emotional discomfort they could feel in a classroom, provided you're not abusing them, which this is doing. But you have to give them tools to alleviate discomfort in healthy ways. That means you have to make it okay for them to question out loud. If you see a kid being like, oh, like what? Say, all right, you seem to disagree. And you have to be very open to what they're going to say. You can't sit there and be like, what's your problem? Or what? You disagree? Well, you would disagree. You can't do that. You have to say, you disagree? Okay, tell us more, explain. And you have to let that information into the conversation, treat it with respect, and have the other students treat it with respect. That's not happening. If there is a student out there with the temerity to say, what if I don't think this is true? What if this doesn't align with my life? What if I don't want to be these identities? You don't have a teacher that says, well, that's okay too. This is one explanation. This is a theory. It is supposed to be intersectional theory. They're presenting it as fact. And that conversation never happens. All right. So now we're getting into more, expanded usage of intersectionality. And here we say, consider this. They always do this. Consider this. Don't forget this. Don't forget this. Intersectionality helps us. Does it? Helps us consider how systemic oppression. So we're also going to tell you that systemic oppression is real. And we're going to keep saying that over and over. And this helps us consider how systemic oppression impacts individuals. Now, some of the people mentioned here may, in fact, have experienced discrimination. Does it then follow that it's systemic? Was it situational or not? How do we know? These questions never come up. Proper inquiry never happens. Never happens. This helps us do the thing that we say is happening, that we say you're going to do. This is more about, intersectionality. They spend a lot of time on intersectionality. What is it? How do our intersectional identities shape experiences and interactions? Notice the framing. How do they? Implication, they do. How do they? What if you're sitting there and you go, I don't think they do. I don't think they do. That's not an option for your answer. And then this one might explain the Claudine Gay plagiarism. Historically, many marginalized communities have not left records that have been seriously studied or presented as valid cultural artifacts until recently. In other words, all this shit we're just teaching you right now is brand spanking new and there's not a lot of stuff written about it, but that's because of marginalization, not because it's bullshit and we just made it up 5 minutes ago. Okay. Prepare to engage a variety of sources in your research by familiarizing yourself with a reliable online source. Are there no primary sources? Are we not going to learn how to actually study historical documents to maybe question some of this? No, 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 no. Prepare to engage by finding a reliable online source. Identify 3 different types of sources you might research to contextualize this article, including non-written sources such as recorded oral histories. Use the citation resource to create a properly formatted citation for each. So we're elevating to value at like sources that most of us would not consider sources for scholarly work of any kind, even a writing workshop. And we're telling them that that's because, the people who produced them, or they were marginalized. They couldn't produce that work. I'm sorry. There's been research done by people of every one of these so-called categories or intersectionality identities going back hundreds of years. Frederick Douglass. Where's Frederick Douglass in all of this? He wrote extensively about race. He wrote extensively about race in America. He wrote extensively about the contradictions between our Constitution and our reality, and he is nowhere to be found. We don't need to familiarize ourselves with an online resource because there just isn't anything. You're going to have to talk to people. All right. And then this is about this guy with his artwork or whatever. And how did this is what really stood out to me. Look deeper. So the guy's doing some art where he takes the kind of drawings they did when they had runaway slaves and he puts in there different descriptions of himself that don't describe him the way they did back then. He still mentions his brown skin. He mentions other things about him. But apparently that's, this groundbreaking thing. They want the students now. Conduct research to explore representations of one of your identities. We are going to assume you have one by now that you can conduct research on. So if you arrive at this point in the program and you don't have an identity to go research, a part of yourself that you've now pulled apart from your whole to make an identity, you better come up with one or you're not going to be able to do this assignment. Collect 1 to 3 images, audio samples, or video clips to analyze. So go find one of your identities in mainstream or pop culture. Compose a 3-paragraph reflection about how this representation has shaped perceptions of this identity. Include evidence from your research to explain why this trope or stereotype. So you better find tropes and stereotypes. Don't just go find like neutral depictions of one of your identities. See, that's what I would want to do. I would want to thwart all of this, and I'd want to go just find some pictures of women that don't, that are like not mainstream at all, and just be like, here you go. I'm a woman. I'm a white woman, Jewish woman, blah, 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 whatever. Even if I was playing along in their sandbox, which I don't like to do, but I would find the most weird, out there examples and just be like, here, that's mainstream. She's a millionaire or whatever. And she's a singer. She's a this, she's a that. And that would probably piss them off no end. But I would find the most non-mainstream thing and go, what? They're famous. Define mainstream. So now we get to Comprehension strategy. The KWL chart is something that we teachers have used a lot. It's like, what do you know? What do you wonder about? What do you want to learn? All this. But again, they're leading the witness. Consider whether there are any items on your wonder column that have not been answered. Compose 2 to 3 questions to share with the class for your research. I can compare conscious and unconscious bias. I can describe how bias shapes our worldview. I can explain the concept of normalization. How about I can challenge the concept of normalization? Normalization being the thing where, we all decided, all of us white privileged people, that we were going to normalize our way of doing things and make that the normal thing and everything else not normal. It didn't happen organically. It didn't happen because the majority of the population was white, Western European for a very long time in our country. It didn't happen because some of the things that people did actually worked and made us prosperous and successful, and other people picked up on them and kept doing them because it's hey, that kind of works, getting a job, showing up on time, doing those sort of things. I don't think that's white Western European. You're not taking a nap in the middle of the day, whatever it is. That just seems to work to make a lot of money, so I'm going to do it. No, it's normalized by the white people. So they make normalization a very, very bad thing, as opposed to a process that can happen organically. No, I'm not ready to talk about this. So go away. Can you go away? Go away. I don't want to see this. It doesn't want to go away. Conscious and unconscious bias. And what did I say about this one here? Yeah. So when they talk about how bias works, this I thought was very interesting. They talk about how not all biases are bad, but that we think, we think we can control them, but we can't. We think we can control them, but we can't. They basically deny free will. They say we deny free will. So it says, I'm trying to find where it actually said that. Because they say it in so many terms, in so many words, rather. Not all biases are bad. Bias can lead to prejudice. They can also lead to preference. Just saying. Conscious or explicit biases are often what we mean when we call someone or something biased. Typically, of the two main forms of bias, conscious bias is easier to overcome because those with conscious bias are aware of their views, etc. So then they talk about unconscious or implicit bias, which has been discussed and the test for it has been debunked. But they do say that unconscious bias, it says you may have implicit biases that actively work against the way you see yourself and want to be. For instance, you may have a bias against women as scientists in positions of power, despite being women and not believing those things. You may hold biases against people of color, blah, blah, blah. They're planting a lot of ideas in the kids' heads. Maybe they do have implicit bias. Maybe they don't. Maybe if you've lived a certain amount of time and you've been accustomed to certain things, it's harder for you to learn new things. Like talk about our grandparents not being, comfortable with women working outside the home or whatever. You can say that's a bias, or you can say they just haven't caught up with changes. But they want to make it like as ugly as possible. And there's somewhere in here, it might be the next page, where they actually talk about how you cannot overcome unconscious bias. You have to constantly be aware of it. You do not have free will. Then they talk about affinity bias, which is true. It is the most common kind of bias. Here it is, how bias works. I'm sorry. Next page. And then it says that your brain develops shortcuts. Many people believe that they can simply use willpower to overcome unconscious bias, but this is not true because unconscious biases happen without us thinking about them. Well, that's why we call them unconscious. But once you become aware that you have an unconscious bias, what does it become? What does it become, class? It becomes a conscious bias, doesn't it? You can no longer be unconsciously biased once you become aware that you have it. So, there might be some merit to somebody saying, hey, it seems like you're kind of biased against this. But the second they do, if it turns out to be true, if you do some self-reflection and it's true, it ceases to be unconscious and then you can't overcome it. Obviously, you have free will. Socialization, the process of learning and the community, they make it like, people have trained you to be this way. We're socialized, all these things. Also, there's truth to that, but it's not a given. I have 3 kids. I didn't train them to think the way they think about other people. In fact, they think in some different ways about different people than I would have thought they would. And certainly I didn't explicitly teach them to. I taught them, race is skin deep. It's not real. It's a social thing. It's a political thing, and it serves no practical purpose. Don't do it. Don't use it. And pretty much all three of them see it that way. But then they go farther in some respects than I would have gone, which is great. But I didn't teach it to them. I don't know where they got it. Now, maybe it was socialized by other people. That's possible. But you can be socialized to the good. It's not all bad. And they talk about how teachers can be biased. Of course they can. Algorithms can be biased. Now, this really got under my skin, the worldviews section. A worldview is a collection of beliefs that shapes the way a person thinks about and interacts with the surrounding environment. We hold worldviews as individuals, but they are heavily influenced by the cultures we grow up in. We are not always aware of our worldviews until they clash with someone else's. We often view cultures and behaviors that do not match our worldview as strange or backward, which is why we may experience culture shock when we visit a country, blah, blah, blah. Now, here's where it gets really weird. While there is no singular white culture, white people are not devoid of culture. The dominant culture in the United States is that of white Anglo-Americans. Because white European Americans are racially and ethnically privileged, I'm just going to insert that in the middle of the whole thing and not even, pause about it. It's just a statement of truth. Better not disagree. They're racially and ethnically privileged. Opinion. And their beliefs and behaviors have been normalized. All of them? So what you guys are any of you who are white out there, do we all think the same? Do we all think the same? Do we? I don't think the same as a lot of white people. But apparently our beliefs, all white people, they'd be saying all black people think the same. Their beliefs, their values, their behaviors. It's okay to say that about white people, white culture. Yeah, that is so effing twisted. I don't even know where to start. Throughout this volume, we will look at some of the worldviews of marginalized racial and ethnic groups. So we're going to stereotype. They're announcing to you, amidst all this little grain of truth, throwing in some crazy opinion. And now they're announcing to you, we are now going to begin stereotyping like crazy. They just did it to white people. What biases are you aware of in your own life? Where do you think they came from? Blah, blah, blah. What is the difference between equality and equity? Equality emphasizes sameness. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Equality, as most of us think about it, is when we talk about it in terms of America, we talk about it in terms of equality of opportunity, equality under the law, equality in terms of our civil rights, like you have a right to life and liberty and, yes, property. You have certain rights, and it doesn't change just because, whether you're white, black, male, female, old, young, able, disabled. No, those rights are equal. It has nothing to do with sameness, and it doesn't look at all people as the same. In fact, quite the opposite. It says because we're not all the same, we have to be politically the same. We have to be legally the same. That's our best protection against these kinds of biases and so on. Where we all, it says where we all have the same opportunities. They do go into that, but they act like it's a bad thing. Equity refers to justice or fairness. According to whom? Who decides? Fair does not always mean equal. Yeah, no shit. Equality, forced equality is unfair. Somebody coming along and saying you get the same amount, you got an A, they have to get an A because it's not fair if you have an A and they don't have an A because they come from a marginalized background is deeply unfair. You earned it, they didn't, but it's not fair. You have to share. That's not fair. Communism is not fair. It distributes things more equally. Ironically, you get equal outcomes, but it's deeply unfair and everybody suffers. But we all know what they mean about it's not fair. It's like, too bad, so sad. You have to suffer some discrimination now because other people didn't have what you had. Now, this also really irritated me. They talk about protests. We're going to get right into protests, kids. Let's talk about protests. And once again, we have, protesting something that all three of these things are depicted as good, except for this one, school board meetings. In recent years, the news has been filled with angry parents protesting at school board meetings, disagreement over issues such as the teaching of race and ethnic studies. So we're going to begin our marketing of ethnic studies to the kids. Poor, poor, pitiful ethnic studies. It's such a victim of oppression. Masking during the COVID pandemic and the rights of transgender students. The rights of transgender students. Let that sink in. Have led to events like the parents shown at this raucous school board meeting in Virginia. Parents' protests of school policies are not just a recent phenomenon. So guess what they're going to juxtapose these against? Can you guess? They're going to juxtapose these against the desegregation protests because they're just the same. Just the same. Notice how they also selectively pick a very angry white woman screaming into the camera. We don't know what she's screaming about. She could be screaming about open the schools. She could be screaming about masking. She could be screaming at the guy who doesn't want boys in the bathroom. We don't know. But it's a picture of an angry white woman screaming and a bunch of parents protesting, and we're going to compare them to segregationists, and yeah, that makes total sense. This is about the killings of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. This one is about protesting, something else to do with George Floyd's murder. Lots of George Floyd references. Observe. What values are seen in the cartoon? What are the messages found in the parents' shirts and signs at the school board meeting? What feelings do their facial expressions suggest? Let's look at feelings. Let's get some more into feelings. All right. Conclude. What role, if any, should parents and guardians play in determining what takes place at school? Let's ask the kids. What role should there be? Let's involve them in this conversation about what their parents are doing. How do you feel about that, mom and dad? Do you think the school teacher should be having this conversation with your kids about when you should decide to protest or not? Is that what they should be talking about at school? Why is examining protests and other forms of activism an important part of ethnic studies? Only reason I can think of is because you want to breed little activists. Forms of discrimination. Again, now we're getting back into more identity stuff. Let's see. The goals. I can differentiate between individual and systemic discrimination. This is the section where they define systemic discrimination and make it, again, like it's a fact. Systemic discrimination is sometimes called structural or institutional discrimination, is a framework that looks to reward and provide advantages to one group over it. Looks to reward or provide advantages. It looks to. It doesn't just happen or exist over time or become a thing organically that you might want to observe and then fix and say, all right, that's kind of gotten ingrained. No, it looks to do that on purpose. On purpose. And the grand irony, as I bring up on this channel all the time, is the public school system did exactly that. It looked to structurally and systemically do something to minority populations and discriminate against them and assimilate them against their will. And we never talk about that in these documents. They never bring it up. They'll talk about school being systemically racist, but in terms of achievement gaps, things like that, the outcomes are racist, not the teaching people they're oppressed, not teaching kids, like, oh, we're going to make it easier for you in math because, it's like too hard for you. Obviously, the outcomes are not happening because it's too hard. It's too challenging. It's too Western. It's too white. It's too whatever it is. But that's not systemically racist, apparently. And then they get into, hiring practices. They're, people have whitened their resume, removing clues to their race to get hired. You know what solves this? What solves these kind of things is not having the government, via the Civil Rights Act of 1964, getting involved in private businesses. Colleges have announced to us, in no uncertain terms, that they're going to find ways around the Supreme Court judgment that they cannot use affirmative action anymore. So they bake it into essay questions for the applications. I tutor kids with essay writing. That's what they do. Tell us something about your identity and how it has shaped you as a person. It's like, these are gatekeeping questions about identity. So they're going to find it in other ways. They tell us this story about something bad that happened to you, whatever. Share your victim story. I mean, they put it into they don't write it that way. Obviously, they have other ways of wording it. But if you didn't have these kinds of things in the first place, and if they weren't taking federal money, and if they didn't have federally subsidized student loans, and if everything were truly private, The colleges could engage in whatever kind of discrimination they want, and there's nothing we could say about it other than in the marketplace of ideas by not attending. We would know right up front, just like Howard University is a black school, we would know this school likes to only hire women. That school, or admit women or gay women or whatever. And you could have a school for every particular little intersectionality that you wanted. And if that's something that was sold, and if that's something that employers wanted on your resume, then guess what? You'd get hired. But they come up with other little ways to figure out, what they want and don't want because of all the force. Get rid of the force, and these things will sort themselves out. They really will. This was kind of gross. 4 eyes of oppression. Again, the irony is the projection that's going along with this. This guy, his work focuses on integrating social justice, emotional healing, spiritual practice. Spiritual practice. Oppression is a system, not just a prejudice. Well, okay. I can't really argue with that, but you haven't provided me any evidence that these kinds of things are actually happening. This is a decent description of ideological oppression, institutional oppression, interpersonal oppression, and internalized oppression. But the impression you're giving the students is this is everywhere. Oh my God, it's everywhere, except right here in this document with this program and these people, which ironically is the main place that it is. It's definitely ideologically oppressive. It triggers my gag reflex. It reflects internalized oppression and internalized desire for power and to be an oppressor, because there's a lot of hostility in this document towards white people. There is a fair amount of institutional oppression because they're using your tax dollars to pay for this. Yeah, you don't have a choice. And there is no alternative. Where are you going to go? I would call that institutional oppression. And interpersonal oppression, don't question them or you're a domestic terrorist. And they'll put pictures of you in the curriculum itself to talk with your children about how oppressive you are. So I would say this is pure projection on their part. Now, the doll test. The doll test. I have to talk about the doll test because the doll test is wrong. And you may not realize that it's wrong, but it is wrong, in fact. This from PsychReg, I found this is from 2020. If you love yourself, you'll love this doll. Why the doll tests don't make sense. Now, there are many, the doll tests got brought up in the first place during, Brown v. Board of Education. They did it to try, initially, they tried to do this to prove that the kids who were in segregated schools were internalizing racism and feeling terrible about themselves and choosing the white doll because they felt terrible about being black. Except they didn't end up really using it in the case because they already knew that that's not really what it showed. All right. So the argument was nowhere near fundamental to the Supreme Court decision. And then they say, good news, the study is wrong. Have you ever heard that? Have you heard that the doll study was wrong? I bet you never heard that. I bet you've only ever heard that it is a fact. Your kids have only ever heard that it's a fact, that it's true. It's not true. It's not any kind of truth. It's an experiment. And it was mildly interesting, but it's so full of problems that it's actually only interesting for what it's not, what it suggests we need to go study more of, which is how self-esteem is formed. So the study is wrong. The Clarks, who did the study, had various theoretical and practical problems in assessing the effect of segregation on self-esteem. First of all, there was no control group. Is Adrian still here? I don't know if Adrian's still here. There's no control group. Is that even a valid experiment? The Clarks simply took the results from segregated schools and said they had proven segregation lowered self-esteem. That does not even come close to proving anything. This is difficult to say unless they compared it to non-segregated schools. Lenny Greener points out Black children in non-segregated schools have far more contact with allegedly racist whites. If this is the case, why should Blacks in schools without whites have less self-esteem? So put Black kids in a racist white school full of racist white kids that are picking on them, bullying them, who don't want them there, parents screaming at them when they go in the school. Why would they, you'd want to know, right? Would they pick the white doll? Would they pick the black doll? What? Where does self-esteem come from? Not only was their study lacking a control group, but the sample it had was incredibly small, making it more difficult to generalize. All right. So the Clarks also commit the composition fallacy in the theoretical design of their study. Their argument goes as follows. Connection to ethnic identity is correlated to self-esteem. Connection to ethnic identity is hurt by segregated schools. Therefore, self-esteem is hurt by segregated schools. But this is illogical at best. Even if X and Y are correlated and Y and Z are correlated, this does not mean X and Z are correlated. It doesn't even pass the basic common sense smell test. If you're in a segregated school, but you're with only Black people, don't you think you'd have a little more connection to your ethnic identity, to your racial identity, than if you were in a desegregated school where people hate you? The doll tests are no better measured than typical self-esteem measures. In fact, it may be worse. In the 1980s, another set of doll test reports came out showing the self-esteem differences in northern schools. These showed that Blacks preferred white dolls in the North even more than Blacks in the South. Doesn't that seem like if their tests were right in the first place, that would be backwards? Where Jim Crow stuff and segregation was even more prevalent? This would indicate either integration hurt Black self-esteem or that the doll tests are completely invalid because you cannot reproduce them at all, even when you have what you want, which is desegregation. Or you can't nullify them. The famous Coleman report suggested Blacks in the rural South were more likely to classify themselves as bright and able to learn than those in the North, where there were desegregated schools. Other major literature reviews using standard measures of self-esteem showed that Black children had greater self-esteem than whites, and that this disparity was actually the smallest in integrated schools. And it says, as expected, African-American children had higher self-esteem scores. Their scores were also higher in another index of self-attitude obtained from pooling the SDQM subscales. These findings are consistent with previous reports with larger national samples of older adolescents. And then they talk about how recently there have been studies to talk about how have found that Blacks across all ages had the highest self-esteem. White self-esteem levels rose slightly, moderated, and slightly declined by age 30. In the end, a significant difference was found between Blacks and whites in favor of Blacks. Across the entire sample, self-esteem would raise and stabilize with age. This creates further uncertainty in the doll tests. Self-esteem is not a stable trait in childhood, so there'll be unreliability in estimates of child self-esteem levels. To this day, the doll tests are curiously massively cited in psychology, but as we see, the original study did not even compare segregated schools to integrated schools. Without knowing this, there is no way to know the segregation had an impact on African-American self-esteem. Furthermore, there's no theoretical reason to believe segregation hurts Black self-esteem more than integration does. Indeed, the data we have, we can either say the doll tests from the data we have, the doll tests are either invalid or the integration had a negative effect on Black self-esteem. That, by the way, is something I have said for a long time. And if you say it, you get beat up for saying it, but I tend to believe it. All right, the way it was done. I'm not saying we should resegregate the schools. I'm saying the way they did it, the way they forced it, caused as many problems, if not more, than not doing it. And then this, here we go. What do you think? We don't really want to know what you think, but we're going to pretend we want to know what you think. And then we're going to ask you a leading question. What is the benefit of looking at systemic oppression this way? We're assuming there is one. Teach? I don't think there is one. That's not an answer. Go find what the benefit is of looking at it this way, because I said there is one. How might understanding different aspects of oppression help us to upend these systems? Well, what if it doesn't? Do you really think you understand different aspects of oppression this way? Or you just state what they are? Do you see what they do with language? How they frame things? All right. And I just noticed this. There's so many comments. Thank you guys for coming live. It really actually helps me to talk to an audience, even though I'm not like pulling you all in here. Did they even ask them why they chose the one they did? It could be as simple as liking that doll's clothing better. Absolutely. And I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again because it's relevant to this comment. When I was a kid of about, I want to say 5 or 6, we went shopping for dolls at a toy store. My grandparents were visiting from out of town, and I was told I could get any doll I wanted. My grandparents were going to buy me a doll. And at the time, you might remember this if you were a Gen X, there were dolls called Chrissy and Velvet. Do you remember Chrissy and Velvet, anyone? These are dolls whose hair came out of the top of their head, and then you could like turn a knob or press a button and it went zoop back into their head. So they could either have long hair, medium hair, short hair, whatever. Chrissy was sort of the big sister doll, the bigger doll. She had long sort of reddish hair, reddish brown. And Velvet had blonde hair, and she was shorter and smaller and wearing a purple dress. Now, I am a natural auburn, brownish red hair person. This is gray, but my natural hair color is like my daughter's, which is kind of a red hair. So there I am standing there with these two dolls. I wanted Velvet. I wanted the little blonde doll. I remember this so well. This is such a source of frustration for me to this day. It's weird, the things that you like. I never got a big wheel either, and I'm still pissed off about it. So, if anyone wants to give me a Christmas present. And my mother was very weird about, what I may have and may not have, what clothes I may wear. Luckily, she departed when I was about 8 years old and didn't try to force her ideas on me anymore. But I picked Velvet off the shelf and she said, no, you shouldn't get that doll. You should get Chrissy because she looks like you. She looks more like you. She has the same color hair that you have. I said, I don't want Chrissy. I want Velvet. I like her purple dress. I don't like that green dress that Chrissy's wearing. I want the one with the purple dress. I want the one with the blonde hair. That is what I want. She's also like smaller than Chrissy. And in my child mind, I wanted a doll I could take everywhere I went. It's kind of hard to take a bigger doll. Never mind. My mother took it out of my hand and bought the Chrissy doll. I mean, when I tell you I had like rage inside of me, it was rage. The kind of rage only like a 5 or 6-year-old can have, right? Get home, unbox the doll. Here, honey, go play with the doll. Pull the doll's hair out. Go get the big sewing shears that my mother had. Bye-bye, all the hair. And threw it on the bathroom floor. That is how I responded to being told, get the doll that looks like you. Now, I grant you, it's anecdotal. It's my one story. But who knows why kids like what they like? To Ego Brain's point, ask them. Even if you get 10 kids in a row that all pick the white doll, who the hell knows why? Who knows why? So there's that. Then let's see, getting into this is more systemic and institutional racism. We get back to some more W.E.B. Du Bois, whatever, right here. More stuff about him. Schools are not immune from institutional racism. What are the goals of schools and whose interests do they serve? You're asking the students? Now we get into white privilege and microaggressions. Again, we're describing white privilege as a fact. White privilege is your history being taught as the core curriculum and my history being taught as an elective. Or maybe white privilege is bullshit and history is taught in school based on how much time we got to cover the important points of history we think every American high school graduate needs to know in order to understand how their country got to be, how the world is, what it is, etc. And most of that history, since we live in Western Enlightenment world, right, that's shaped by Western culture, was made by Western white Europeans. That's what that is. So if you don't like that, if you don't want to learn that history and you don't want what you call your history, so you're not an American, you're not a Westerner, you don't live in this country with these values and what all the stuff that you don't feel like you need to know that, you want to learn some esoteric history about people who, I'll put a fine point on it, no longer matter. The dead ones I'm talking about, the dead ones, they're interesting. It's interesting to learn about how humans have evolved and their values have lasted or not lasted. But in terms of being relevant to today and how we live our lives and what goes on here, there's a limited amount of time in the day and year and so on to teach. That has something to do with white privilege. If you go live in Africa and all the history you're going to learn probably is going to be made by Black people. Okay? So that's just a function of where you live. I can assure you, they didn't teach any United States history in Austria. They taught Western European history, mostly of Austrian people who are like 90% white. Is that white privilege? Or is that just being, common sense? We're going to teach our people about our history. So that, privilege is defined as the unearned and often unseen benefits and advantage that are enjoyed by members of a privileged group. And presumably all white people have that. Right? Cultural appropriation is a form of stealing. It's not sharing. It's stealing. If you're not Chinese and you dress up in Chinese costume, that's stealing. If you're not Native American and you wear a headdress for any purpose whatsoever, that's stealing. It's hurtful. There's no no intent there. It's just that you did it is hurtful. So the lesson questions for the student, let's go back onto that. Content connections. How did racial discrimination become entrenched in U.S. society over time? So we've made no progress. It became entrenched, but now it also became unentrenched. What are the impacts of racial discrimination today? It's not gotten any better. That's the implication of that. Now, I was wrong before when I said this may explain the plagiarism. This is the passage. Whenever you quote, summarize, or paraphrase another author, you have a choice to include an attribution in the body of your text, presentation, or dialogue. Do you? You have a choice. That's interesting. Use attribution in addition to citation. Attribution clarifies whose ideas helped you shape your opinions. How can attribution help combat erasure of contributions from marginalized groups to their fields or societies? Is there an equivalent of attribution for artists, songwriters, et cetera, et cetera? So you have a choice. Attribute it, don't attribute it. All depends on whether marginalized, not marginalized. Learning goals. Now we get to I can explain the purpose of ethnic studies. This is where we're getting hard into we are going to sell ethnic studies. It is normal for informational text to change the way you understand and interact with the world. Depending on the text, you may also have a strong emotional reaction that needs time and attention. Paying attention to the reactions that arise from exploring your culture and other cultures is an important part of being a student of ethnic studies. So they're telling the student it is normal, expected, and for you to have strong emotions, and you need to pay attention to that, and you need to nurture that, and you need to take time with that, and so on. Practice unpacking your reactions by writing continuously for 10 minutes, like struggle yourself. Okay, write continuously for 10 minutes, be in your emotion. Don't worry about your spelling or anything like that. Just, and you may want to look deeper and share it with someone you trust. Ethnic studies is a field of study. I can summarize the history of ethnic studies. I can describe the challenges faced by ethnic studies. And we have achievement gap, etc. Counter narratives. Now we're getting into the Paulo Freirean, idea. We're going to have counter narratives. There's the man himself. There he is. There he is. Okay. Anti-racism, Kendi. Spotlight on Paulo Freire. Nowhere in all of this does it say that he's a Marxist. But we know he is. He was a Brazilian educator and philosopher. He was appointed director of Brazil's Department of Education and Culture of the Social Service. And you should go check in, if you're ever really bored, go check into the history of Brazilian education, literacy, and turmoil and so forth post Paulo Freire. Yeah, it's not good. It's really not good. And then we get into the 5 demands. So the Third World Liberation Front, challenging the movement. So the 5 demands. These are the 5 demands of the Third World Liberation Front. This is Paulo Freire stuff. Pamphlet distributed by students at the University of California, Berkeley highlights the demands. There's no challenge to this. There's nothing anywhere that says this is Marxist. 100% Marxism. It is just presented to the kids like, look how hard we're fighting for ethnic studies. That funds be allocated for the implementation of the Third World College. The demand for third world people in positions of power. And then specific demands and so on. The 5 demands. They're presented to the student like, look how hard we're fighting for this. We're fighting so hard. There have been challenges to the movement. Ethnic studies allows students to have meaningful conversations about topics of race, because you can't possibly have a meaningful conversation about it without this, without a bunch of Marxism. What is the history and purpose of ethnic studies as a field? Why do some people challenge the teaching of ethnic studies in schools today? And of course, we're going to do our rhetorical analysis talking about white silence. It's the concept that those with a position of privilege can choose to ignore issues of inequality, bias, and discrimination. There is so much projection going on here. Where are we now? What did we see from the presidents, the college presidents? They're in positions of power. What are they ignoring? What are they choosing to ignore because of their power? Is there power because of their race? Because I saw 3 white women and 1 black woman. Is it because of their gender? Is it why do they feel so powerful and privileged that they can just decide what is best for everyone who's going there despite the enormous price tag that people are paying to be there? Why aren't they depicted as having a privilege to have that kind of power? Because it's enormous power. They play with billions of dollars. They play with people's lives. People who go to Harvard are going to go to medical school, engineering school, law school. They're going to become politicians. They're going to become Supreme Court justices. Well, I hope not from this point forward. I hope we have a little more sense than to hire them to do those things anymore without really, really strict vetting and explicit repudiation of this kind of bullshit. But who the hell are they? And I don't see people like remaining, if we're remaining silent about what they're doing and their power and privilege because we're scared. It's because we might lose our jobs. It's because we will be, shamed and blacklisted and called terrorists. But I'm privileged and have power, and Claudine Gay is not. I'm sorry, what? Oh, look, they're trying to ban ethnic studies in all these places. Students, why are they showing this to students? This thing that we're teaching right now, all these parents and bad people are trying to ban it. Why is this being presented to students? No, I'm serious. Even if you believe that they should be learning about ethnicity and race, intersectionality, even if you believe that, why are they pitching their product to the kids? In focus, unpack current events and conversations. This again is very specifically aimed at activism. They just want you to summarize everything that you should do as a student. Comprehensive strategy, create a visual, recorded, or written description of how your experiences and identities have shaped the way you read and your relationship with text, blah, blah. Really immerse yourself and how your connection to all of the stuff that we just told you about has shaped you. Hold a practice discussion in small groups. Create an annotated bibliography, blah, 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 blah. All right, now I promised you that I was going to show you some of the issue as well. Because this one is, if you thought that one was bad, this one is as bad. All right. This is called the issue. This is supposed to supplement subject matter areas. Okay. Now I'm going to jump around a little bit. Notice anything? What do you guys notice here? Globalism. The top 3 innovative countries. Globalism. Industrial Revolution, change makers in their societal contributions. They didn't just, invent these things. It's societal contribution. Digital technology, inventions of the second industrial revolution. So you might say, hey, Dad, that's pretty good to learn. Yeah, it's not bad. Uh-oh. Stolen innovations. We got to have a moment for women. And we're going to have some more women. And then we're going to go to, other kinds of whatever analysis. Money trail, STEM versus humanities. Sources of funding. Got to have grit, another woman. Oh, but she's an Asian woman, so it's okay. And now we get to it, don't we? Now we get to it. Should schools invest more heavily in AI, affirmative or negative? We're going to put this to the kids. We're going to put this to the kids. By the numbers, looking deeper. What do they say in looking deeper? Read and annotate the arguments, circle opinions and biases, underline facts and evidence, and draw a box around points that contain inaccurate or unsupported information. Can we go back to the ethnic studies one and do that? That'd be fun. Can we put boxes and circles around unsupported information? Okay, let's do that. That'd be good. And of course, we have a thoughtful robot standing there. Write an argumentative essay about this. Evaluate each argument about AI, innovation and change, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, at least there's Ayn Rand. At least that's in there. I guess I should be pleased. And so on. And some more writing. The meta museums. We have more tech, digital art, et cetera, and so forth. Now, if I thought they were going to give this a thoughtful treatment as far as the AI and globalism, whatever, I might even think it was good. But let's just say based on their ethnic studies curriculum, I'm highly skeptical. But I didn't have time to go through both of these because I already spent, hours doing the other. So, real quick, I promise you I'd go through the stuff about the programs and like, how they sell them. So let's do that a little bit. So the diversity one, let's just take a look. They, as I said, they have the different ones. Look at the AI art. Authentic voices and representation. That's what that looks like to them. I don't know. Everybody there looks thin and beautiful to me. So, I mean, the body positive people are going to be pretty pissed off. And then that's not at all creepy right there. How about that? It's a little new agey, don't you think? Culturally responsive content. Hope there are no Christians who are worried about the cultural relevance of the education for their kids, because that is super duper new age imagery. New age, Eastern religions. I see just about everything represented but their culture. But Christians don't count, so that's okay. And then going to the voices one that we talked about, how they sell that. This is how they sell that. So they show you some screenshots and they go through it. We have an example of an assignment. They show you the different things, but the thing that I found to be the weirdest was the images. Let's see what they show you for US history for marketing. You're pretty standard images, but engaging in accessible US history curriculum, authentic narrative and compelling sources. And there you have that. So this is what they have. This is the company, Gibbs Smith Education. So that's that. That's what I wanted to show you today. I hope you found that, educational, interesting. And I also hope that you were taking notes of some of the words. They conveniently highlighted for you what the words are that you need to look for to jump out at you, right? And I hope I made my case that ethnic studies as a discipline is a problem because they're presenting to your kids that ethnic studies is not only important in and of itself to focus on race and ethnicity as this all important thing, but they have separated it out from the rest of the curriculum. So rather than we're going to teach history of, let's say, segregation, and we're going to talk about the way people used to think about it and all the different events that occurred and how people changed their minds and how we move forward from it, they want to stay in the negative side of it and like, well, what caused this? Why did they do this? Let's like hang out here and marinate here. And not only to understand it, but to let you believe that this is just a part of human beings based on their color, based on where they're from, based on the history of their ancestors, that it doesn't leave them, that it stays, that we as humans can't evolve individually or even as a nation. So if you had this notion of like, we're all in this together as a nation, we're all Americans, we don't need to hyphenate, and it really doesn't matter what you look like, or at least as an aspirational goal, like Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream, that will be judged by the content of our character. If that's, you can do two things at once. You can say, we're not there yet to the extent that I wish we were, but that is the goal. And my problem with ethnic studies is that is not their goal. Their goal is social justice. Their goal is to right the past wrong. Those people are dead. They're not here. And their legacy, I would hope, I would like to believe people like my great-grandparents who suffered persecution both in Russia and then even after they got here would not want my legacy, or their legacy rather, and what I live in my daily life to be anger, resentment, frustration, and constantly looking at what is not good about America still for me or for Jews or for this or for that, because whatever, people haven't done enough work. I would hope that what they would want for me is that I would spend every single day individually going over, around, under, through every obstacle that I might encounter, regardless of why it's there. That it really shouldn't matter why there's an obstacle. If there's an obstacle, deal with it. And if you truly can't deal with it, and I'm sorry, but in 2023, we are not in a country that is where there's still an arbitrary obstacle that says, I'm sorry, you're a Jew. So, it's not going to happen for you. You're a woman, so no. And also, you're too old, or you're too ugly, or you're too this, or you're too that. People aren't saying that. They were saying that. And to the extent I might believe that somebody is doing that or thinking that or has that bias, I also have choices, as does every person. If that's what you genuinely believe, this person doesn't want to hire me because I'm a 57-year-old woman. By the way, I've been told to my face that that's why I'm not getting hired. Now, I could get all bent about it and start ranting and raving about systemic oppression and my intersectionality and my, victimhood and blah, blah, blah. Or I could say, well, screw you and the horse you rode in on. I don't want to work for you anyway. That's what a free market would do. That's what what market-based economies are supposed to do, is sort that out, where people like me hearing that could say, okay, you're an ass. I'm going to go work for somebody else. And by the way, I'm going to tell anybody who I speak to that you're a bunch of ageist, racist assholes, because I have a mouth and I have free speech and I can do that. I don't need to go bitching to the government and say, make a rule that they have to hire me. And you know what else? Make them hire people exactly like me, even though they're not me, for the next 30 years to a quota of X percent because they just did this to me. It's 2023, guys. We are so far, it is an insult to the memory of the people who were explicitly en masse legally blocked from doing things to act now like you're oppressed. Just because you look a certain way and something didn't go your way today, so it must be bias. It must be racism. And that's what ethnic studies does. Is it teaches cognitive distortions, it entrenches them, it calls on kids to get emotional and irate about things, or to feel guilty about them and feel ashamed about them, and to recognize things as true that aren't necessarily true, like you're you know engaging in white silence, you have white privilege, you have this, you have that. When you're a child, even as a young adult, even regular adults, not so young adults, you get people in positions of authority over you telling you this stuff is true, telling you or indicating to you that you're somehow lesser or stupid if you don't believe it or agree with it, or that, well, I guess that's just proof of your racism, Robin DiAngelo. The reason you don't agree with me is that you're, like Ibram X. Kendi says, the only reason you don't like anti-racism is it's proof you're a racist. This is white fragility. Isn't that convenient? It's a Kafka trap. I did a video 2 years ago, at least now, about Kafka traps. Our kids are put in Kafka traps every single day by ethnic studies curricula. And I hope I was just able to show you how they do it. So I'm going to drop this link into the chat there, so that if you want to, follow along on your own, look through it in more detail, you can. I'm just scrolling through here and just seeing if there's anything that I missed. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that I missed. So glad to see all of you guys here. Thank you so much. What is Paula saying here? She says, Paula Glenn says, I wish everyone would pull their kids out of school and homeschool. Dr. Ping, the Deb had on a couple of years ago, has some good ideas for private and homeschooling. I should have him back on. We were scheduled to be back on, and my daughter came home for a visit, and she was struggling with mono and a concussion at the time, so we had to cancel our recording. But we are working on getting that done. Yes, see the whole truth. The infrastructure for education is in collapse. It's just not giving it up yet. So we have to. This is interesting. Tatey says it's also boring though. If this was being taught when I was in high school, all I would have heard is Charlie Brown's teacher. That's a really interesting point. I genuinely believe that a lot of the students who are stuck in these classes are of kind of two basic types. The type that would be like you, Tatey, of just going, oh God, wah, 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 right? And the types who are like, this is so interesting, and I'm going to go home and repeat every word to my parents. And I'm going to tell them that they are just so wrong about so many things. And, my grandparents are so backwards, whatever. So I think you have your kids who, it's not that they recognize this as BS. They're just like, oh my God. They have no patience for it. They think school is just like this and everybody's a pedant. And they lose all their sense of joy in learning and even living. They start to think this is how people are in general. They can probably become pretty bitter and cynical and apathetic. So that's not good either. So that's why I tell parents, like, even if you think, oh, my kid's not going to fall for this, they're really good, blah, blah, blah. They're not going to fall for the banana in the tailpipe trick or whatever. Okay, fine. But does it then follow they're okay? I mean, if I had to spend even 20 minutes a day doing this crap, I think I would want to like eat a bullet. I mean, it's pretty bad. So, and I don't recommend that, by the way. I just say like not advocating for that. I'm just saying, um, check in with your kids that like this is drudgery. And if you wonder why they're sitting there surfing the internet or playing video games instead of paying attention in class, maybe it's because of this. And they're wasting their time. They get one childhood before they have to like go out into the world and launch and take care of themselves. And maybe one of the reasons they're hanging around longer and resisting growing up is they feel on some level robbed. I know I would. I felt robbed as it was being a latchkey kid and being made to do all my own adult stuff by the age of 10. And I still, launched, but I remember my 20s were a little bit, as adult as I was living in my own apartment, I was still kind of immature because I felt like I had to grow up too quickly. I never had that rebellious time or never had that time to do anything else. When are they having time to learn about what they want to learn about? There's all these adults going, this is so important. This is so important. This is so important. And yet they're probably leaving the classroom, going out into their life and being like, but doesn't, I don't see this in reality. So there's that. Let's see, what else do I see here? Bum, 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 bum. You want to see what social justice looks like with massive reversals? Go check out South Africa or see what went on since. Yeah, that was pretty bad. They've had some ups and some downs there for sure. And of course, Marxism played a role there too, didn't it? Let's see. I think that's about it. Unless you guys have any more questions, I think we've pretty much covered the topic. Now this is funny. Max says, isn't ethnic studies just people studies? That's what a lot of people think it is when you talk to parents about ethnic studies. They think it's like that ethnic aisle in the grocery store. Like, oh, you mean all the stuff that you didn't have time to cover in, US history or world history, or the stuff about the different ethnicities that came to America and just be like, there were Irish people and then there were Italian people, and let's learn a little of that. So all that, that's what a lot of parents think. And that's not what it is at all. That's not, in fact, it used to be called multicultural studies. It used to be called things like, multicultural history and such. But ethnic studies comes from liberated ethnic studies. It's actually tied to Paulo Freire. It's a very specific framework for centering ethnicity, which is find anything different about you. And in the United States, it's the term that is preferred because we are a melting pot. So we would be one of the easiest populations to separate and divide into these groups because we have so many different ethnicities of origin represented. Do you really think, I mean, somebody asked, I think it was Mac also, you asked, I wonder how much white history gets taught in China. Almost none. Almost none, except the bad parts. They like to do that. But like they teach their own ethnicities. Like they have a lot of ethnicities in China, so they might teach that. I don't know, actually. I don't know, because to a certain extent they like to keep it all Mandarin, right? But this just wouldn't happen. Like I said, it wouldn't happen in Austria. You wouldn't be teaching ethnic studies there. You wouldn't be teaching any of this stuff. It would be like, what? They might teach something different that is about, race or about, the divide and conquer Marxism. I think mostly over there, they teach about climate alarmism. It's much more about globalism and climate change. And they spend a lot of time telling the kids there that America is racist, that America is a bad place. And they will use this stuff to tell them that we're bad, but it obviously has to be framed differently because they're not trying to put those kids into a Kafka trap of like, you're guilty. And if you don't think you're guilty because you don't think you're guilty. I mean, you deny it, then that's proof that you're guilty. They don't really do that over there. As long as they want to take a verbal dump on America, it's okay. They can be white. It's fine. But we can't. And they'll use that whole, well, America promised to be equal rights and you're not living up to it. We never made that promise. It's like, yeah, well, we didn't oversee the extermination of 6 million Jews. So there's that. But no, I mean, to their credit, they've taught the Holocaust, they've taught that stuff, but they don't burden the kids with this kind of guilt. They burden them with climate guilt, but they don't seem to burden them with this. They definitely do push the gender stuff a lot in Europe, although they are scaling back while we are ramping up. This seems to be unique to us. And my guess at this point is that the reason they push it hard here is that we are the last bastion of individual liberty on the planet. And we're not doing so hot with that. We haven't been for a long time, for a long, long time. So I wanted to show you one last thing that just popped into my periphery. They're going through the schools that use this. So you've got 4,087 partner with us and become part of an expansive network spanning over 4,087 schools nationwide. 1,121 resources that they sell. Home to 80 dedicated employee owners. So they're also, they have that. I want to see something about the company. So they have the vision. Where are the people? Where are the people of the company? They don't really show that. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Who our programs are for, how to use our books, blog. They have a blog. So you can go through and look through some of this as well if you want to. Oh, featured an international podcast. Yay. The primacy of school culture, etc. So you can look through all this if you want. There's a lot there. Over 4,000 schools. So I think it's important. And I think whether your school, yeah, we're the biggest. Wait. Oh, we're talking now about my leg. Did you give any honest thought to an osteopath? I've used osteopaths in the past, and yes, I have thought about it. When I can afford one, I'll go. You have to pay out of pocket for osteopath, and my insurance is already crap, and as you know, I have no money. So I'll just put in another plug for joining my community. Buy a t-shirt for Christmas. Do have some great stuff in the store. Yeah, I mean, it's, I'm not starving or anything, but this is basically my job now because of quitting my actual job. No, don't be sorry. I made this choice. I quit because I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't stomach and I'm so glad I did when I did, because they were hiring a lot of progressives into the organization, and I was being thank you, Mac. You're amazing. Thank you so much for becoming a member. Mac is very supportive and loyal. I appreciate that. And he takes breaks to go take care of his kids and then come back and watch us. So I'm very appreciative of your time. So yeah, I mean, I've said before, integrity is expensive, and I'm not saying this to toot my own horn, but I can't work for some place where they have a mission to do something, and then they start hiring people who have a view different than the mission, because donors are pushing them to do it. It was a nonprofit. And then when somebody doesn't like me personally because they don't like my politics and they go after me, thank you so much, Adrian. Thank you so much. I appreciate it very much. Thanks for the super chat. And so yeah, I quit. It was making me miserable, and I didn't have a lot of time to spend doing this kind of work. And this kind of work, while I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's fun, that would be a lie. It's actually the opposite of fun, but it is purpose. It gives me purpose. It definitely does give me an outlet for what I feel compelled to do, which is tell the truth about what's going on. I know how to look at this stuff and how to translate it. So I definitely want to share that with people who are struggling or who don't know how to do it. And and it's important to me on a human level. So, that's I couldn't do it. So I have not written a book. I write articles when I can sit down and focus for long enough. I have a little bit of ADD, so it's a lot harder for me to write because I tend to be a perfectionist and I hyper focus. And when I start writing an article and then I write it and I write it and I rewrite it and I write it some more, and you might not know by the finished product because I'm not the greatest that ever was, but I get a little too caught up in it. Whereas this is a little easier for me to do on the fly. My temperament and personality is better suited to this kind of stuff. Like doing the kind of research, reading it, making notes, like I can do that all day. But writing articles, well, I can do it. I just tend to get lost in it and I don't produce as much as I can with video. I did want to let you guys know that coming up soon, January, it's going to start officially, but we'll be announcing it hopefully by the end of the week with a new page and everything off Woke Screen. I am starting a parent support group. This will be for parents, period, not just homeschooling parents. I want to create, and please excuse the expression, safe space, but a place where parents who are kind of waking up to all this junk and starting to see it can come, not to learn specific stuff. I'm not going to like be teaching anything in this group. This group is where I want parents to be able to come and have a place where they can talk, I'll be there, and where they can talk to each other and to me about whatever it is that is going on in their parenting right now, knowing what they know about their kids' schools or knowing what they know about education. Parents are dealing with a lot of grief. They're dealing with a lot of stress, a lot of grief, a lot of guilt. I talk to parents who say, I wish I'd pulled my kids sooner, but now they're in like 10th grade. Or I really wish I could work from home, but I can't. So now I have to send my kid to the school and I have all kinds of guilt about it because I know it's bad, but I don't know what else to do. And I want to provide a place where parents can work through that and find ways to deal with it so that they can inoculate their kids against the school they have to send them to, or they can find constructive ways to fight it at home, find ways to build community that they can still be sort of in it, but not of it. And I think they need community. We need fellowship. We need to be together in a place where you're not worried. Like Facebook, too many people can come in and like yell at you, whatever. It's not private enough. So I want to have it be a member space. There is a paywall, but people can come there and say, all right, I'll tell you the truth. The reality of it is I really just can't pull my kid out of school, but I have terrible guilt about it. How can I deal with that? What can I do at home? What can I do differently that I can help myself not feel this way? And my hope is that I can help people be better parents because they're not overcome by the emotions that come with facing the fact that education is in crisis. And there's very little that we can do about it that isn't drastic. There's a lot we can do about it like at the micro level in our own families, but that's what people are having trouble with because they're overwhelmed by the macro. They're overwhelmed by college is shit. What's my kid going to do? Right? Or, even if they can afford it, right? Or the school I have to send them to is violent, but I don't think I can leave. What do I do? So I just want to kind of create like a port in the storm for that, where we can have these conversations, we can talk about it, where it's a judgment-free zone. Nobody's going to sit there and say, you should leave, you should leave, you should leave. Even I'm going to say, okay, what do you need? What would help you today? What would help you wake up tomorrow and be able to do better for your kid? Because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to help our kids get through, things in a healthy way and grow up happy and healthy and things like that. And I'm realizing that I will advocate for abolition all day long. I will fight against government schools. I will not shy away from saying what I think needs to happen and what I think is best as far as, that I think homeschooling or some kind of alternative to institutional schooling is best. But I don't live in a fantasy world and I'm not a revolutionary. I'm not trying to burn it all down. I think we have kids alive today who need our help and their parents are that line of defense. So that's what I want to help. And that will be coming in January. Let's see. Random question. Are you going to have a way for folks to help provide services? My dad's church is looking to provide a space for homeschooling or microschooling in North Carolina. Well, Um, the 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 logician membership in the Discord of Woke Screen allows people to promote their resources. But if it's the kind of thing where it's like, hey, I have a resource I want to offer, um, let me know what it is. I'll put it in the resources and I'll put some tags in there by geographic region. And we're going to start building that. We're going to be restructuring the resources to be easier to search as a page rather than just in Discord. And eventually we'll have tags for geographic regions. And possibly if we get enough of them, we might even be able to go down to state level. And I could put something like your dad's church. So definitely send it along to me. But for people who have resources they want to keep promoting over and over and over, for example, that's one of the things that the monthly membership is for, is you can promote all day long, promote your services as a teacher, a tutor, a babysitter, a guide, like whatever, a mentor, a coach. That's what it's for. It's one of the things that it's for. And then let's see, Mac is saying, seriously though, your wealth of concise observation, research, and thought, you should give it a shot. Everybody tells me this. You might be surprised. You might surprise. I'll think about it. I think I have a little bit of imposter complex. I don't think I'm worthy, honestly. I'm not being humble. I am so enamored of people who write books, and I've read so many wonderful ones that it's hard to conceive of doing it justice. Let's see. In the end, we may very well need to just raise the whole system and start over. Well, we will, but raise and raise. It's kind of like our it may get to that where it's got to be literal, but I don't think we're quite there yet, and we need to end it. I just think we can end it by attrition. I think we can end it by pressure. I think what we're seeing at Harvard and the college levels, that's going to be good. That needs to continue, because what happens up there trickles, the shit flows downhill, because what they're teaching to teachers then goes into the classroom, and administrators then goes into the classroom. What they're teaching future lawmakers goes into policy. That's all coming downhill into K-12. It started in the universities and the ed schools. It started at grad ed at Penn. It started at Columbia University Teacher College and Harvard University Teacher College, School of Education. These places are cesspools. They need to end. They need to be defunded immediately. That would do a lot of good. Without the grant money, without all of the influx of cash for research, then none of this would be research based, would it? So it's the money. You've got to cut off the money. You've got to disincentivize this kind of work financially, and that is how you raise it to the ground. Let's see what else. I need your publisher. What did you write? See the whole truth? What am I missing? What is your book? Is there a book I should have read? I missed it. So tell me what your book is. And but yeah, that's it. I don't have any other shows this week, except for Friday. I will be you have several books. Please drop me a note privately and let me know what they are if you don't want to tell us. If you're trying to maintain your anonymity, I totally understand, but I want to know what they are. Send me an email. Author, co-author. That's so great. That's awesome. Uh, so also you guys, if one of the cool things about the membership on the Discord is there's a section for you to just suggest the members only show titles. So that is the place where you can get custom shows. Like I do one on Monday about homeschooling, and I do one on Friday that's more about just education in general, kind of like this is, but it's private, so I can get a little spicier. And if there's something you want me to talk about and you're a member of that community, you can go in and say, hey, Deb, do a show about this, and I'll do it. Yeah, we have a Discord. It's at wokescreen.com/the reason we learn. So I saw that you joined as a bronze member of YouTube, but for just a little bit more, you can become a logician, which is the lowest paid membership over for the Discord, and you get all kinds of benefits. You get the Discord, you get the 2 free shows a week, which you then can watch the recordings of in our resources. I have resources, educational resources that are not just for homeschooling. They're even for parents trying to supplement their kids' education. I have all kinds of juicy stuff in there, and I keep adding to it as I find things. Links to, free stuff, all kinds of things. And I also go in there and drop links to articles that I'm reading. So if you're not following me on Twitter constantly, but I find a great article that you need to read, I drop it over there and you can stay in touch with, like it's like a digest. The member area page shows my latest podcast, my latest videos, my upcoming lives or interviews, articles. It's all in one place. And so that's why I'm trying to get people over there. People are like, why are you there? Why aren't you on Substack anymore? Why aren't you on Locals anymore? Why are you doing this? Well, you see, I kind of like to keep more of the money that people are so kind as to give me. And I don't really want to share it with Substack and Locals and YouTube and those people. And they take a much bigger chunk than Woke Screen does. In addition, I have a store there where I sell t-shirts. I have lots of different awesome t-shirts that have many of the things I have said over time or said on my The Reason We Learn Instagram. And they're now in these beautiful t-shirts. They're actually really soft, thick cotton. They make fantastic gifts. My husband recently bought 2 of them and I'm like, I want them. They're very, very nice. And so there are ways that you can like get value for value. Remember, I'm all about value for value. I don't want just like you feeling sorry for me. That is where you can go and support my work, but also get something out of it, get the most out of it for, bang for your buck. And that's at the Discord. I'm trying to set up, community calls, but there aren't enough people available at the times that I set them up. So I'm going to be working on changing the times. And those would be twice a week where you have a call where it's like, I turn it on in the Discord and we can chat, no faces, if you don't want, and just chit chat and so forth twice a week, the 2 live streams a week. And then the parent support group is going to be a separate membership, but we will be doing a combination perk for Christmas time. So keep your eyes out for that kind of offer as well. And yeah, Locals was taking too much. And also in addition to that, their live streaming capability was not very good. So what I do now is I do my custom live streams through StreamYard webinar and give the private link over in the Discord to the members. So I can still use the awesome technology, but distribute it there. Yeah, it's really clever. And Woke Screen is, that's a very private platform where I have privacy and so do you. You don't have to worry about us selling your information or anything like that. We are trying to operate as far as we possibly can away from those things that could censor us. So that's why I moved. All right. Well, I think that's about it. We've been on for a long time. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. To everybody watching on the replay, thank you for checking us out. Please like and share, and I will catch you at the next one. Have a great week, you guys.